9 o'clock. It's 7:18.
Can we do the raffle real quick?
Oh, you want to do the raffle?
So I can go home.
Andy wants to go home. I say we do the raffle at 10.
I got two things. We'll do one at each break. How about that?
Whatever you want to do.
They keep putting them back in until you get
I picked the one I want. You can pick your own. Pick your own. Kristen Landon. Okay, this is rigged. We're gonna do it. Thank you, sir.
Oh, you're welcome. Are you going to claim your prize?
I got it for you.
Oh. All right. I take it you've won before.
No, her mother's in charge.
Oh.
Her mother's the recruiter.
Oh, nepotism. Okay.
A lot of that going on.
I guess so. All right. So, what does adversely affecting educational performance mean? Okay, education is actually not just about education. It's also about socialization. It's also about vocational needs, emotional needs. Grades and standardized tests, it says, are one measure, and my personal belief is they are the worst. Grades don't mean anything, at least to me. I know a lot of people will probably be passing out right about now. And the reason why is, how many people in this room ever got an A in a class and don't remember anything you learned? Or may not have actually even learned anything, right? And I'm sure that some of you may or may not admit it, but you also got, like, say, maybe a C, a D, or maybe even failed a class, and you actually learned a bunch, right? And you haven't forgotten what you learned, right? So grades don't mean anything. And to tell you the truth, grades don't measure learning at all. They measure performance, right? And performance for each teacher is different. I'm pretty sure everybody in this room has also heard, if you don't follow my rules, you're not going to pass my class, right? What does that have to do with education? That has to do with behavior, right? So grades really don't mean anything, and they certainly don't measure what a kid learns. If you want to find out what a kid learns, you ask them to grade themselves. And a lot of people think that that's nuts, but when I was teaching, I had my kids grade themselves, and they had to write me a little essay about why they gave themselves that grade. And I can tell you, in every instance, I never had a kid give themselves a grade that was higher than the grade I was going to give them. In fact, in most cases, it was lower. And my favorite comment of all time was a kid who told me that I had an incredibly interesting class and they really enjoyed coming, but they didn't learn a lot. And so they gave themselves a B. They said they would have given themselves a C, but they earned a B because they showed up every day. I mean, I can't argue with that. I gave them an A, so, you know. But in any case, schools also have to consider how students' emotional health or other conditions adversely affect their non-academic performance. And for kids who are ADD, this is actually kind of a big deal. Kids who are ADD generally have an elevated level of anxiety about everything. And so they freak out. Tests are, like, especially multiple choice tests, are the worst tests you can give a kid who's actually A, very smart, or B, is ADD. Why? Because they can find two answers that they think could be correct. And I guarantee you, if you spent time talking to the kid about why why this was the right answer, they could defend it, even if it wasn't the right answer, right? And they could make it fit into that box that the teacher was looking for. So it's not uncommon, like for my kids who are ADD, I have them take the test with everybody else. I have all my kids do everything that everybody else does. But their accommodation or modification is that they also take the test verbally, right? And I learned that from my own son, who in second grade had to take a test on Colorado. And the teacher sent me a note saying that he had failed the test miserably, that obviously he didn't study, and obviously he didn't work that hard, etc., etc., etc. And I was like looking at this, laughing to myself. So I came into his class and I sat down with her. I said, you know, Willie has a 504 plan. I want you to give Willie the test verbally. It's in his 504 plan. Well, it's obvious he didn't study. I'm like, well, it may be obvious to you, but you're required to give him the test verbally. So let's just see. So I said, Willie, what do you know about Colorado? He goes, what do you want to know? I said, tell me everything you know. 25 minutes later, the teacher was begging me to ask him to stop. Wow. Right? He knew all this stuff. I mean, in minutia galore. And he could tell you all about it. But he did not have the patience or the ability to sit there and write out all this stuff. But it was all in there, right? So there's a number of situations. My son, I like using him as an example because I've lived with him for these 17 years and watch him do some of the same things I did as a kid. In fact, one of the more fascinating moments for me was in 5th grade when I came in to teach his class how to write an essay, and my son was half excited, half terrified that I was there, and he was so anxiety ridden that I was coming in that as I'm talking I watched him rip out a page out of his notebook and wad it up and start eating it. What was fascinating to me about that was that I did the exact same thing when I was his age. And I was all of a sudden I went, whoa, and anyway, my son's a really great athlete. He's doing track now, and he did wrestling. He managed to win his section as a wrestler for 2 years after never wrestling before. However, his best sport is baseball. He's a remarkable baseball player. But he won't play because his anxiety drives him insane, and he hates to make an out. He's a perfectionist. And making an out, yeah, I know there's a couple of other people like that. I try to tell him perfection is a myth. Who cares if you're hitting 700? Who cares? But it doesn't matter. And it's that ADHD, ADD behavior. And by the way, ADD is different for girls than it is for boys. For boys, you can generally see it. Or you'll hear it because they're kind of like me, kind of here and then here and here and here. Girls, it's mostly internal. And so they're very calm and sedate looking, and inside their head they're all over the place. All right, least restrictive environment. We talked about what that was. And to the maximum extent possible, kids with disabilities are educated with their non-disabled peers. And I would go so far as to say, another extreme example, I had a kid whose grandmother worked for a school district but was nervous about advocating for him because she was employed by the district her grandson was going to. And her grandson had Down syndrome. And we talked about it, and I convinced her that he should be put in a regular kindergarten class, not a special day class. And my rationale was Down's kids have some challenges academically. However, their greatest need is social. And so if they had a room full of kids monitoring or mirroring what they're supposed to do, they would kind of glom on and do it, and they would also make relationships, right? And in kindergarten, for these kids, you all grew up with kids, right? Those relationships, a lot of them form in kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade, and carry on through. So it was really important from a social construct to put this kid in that classroom. And it really worked with him. And in fact, I would venture to say that most of the kids who were non-disabled learned way more from that kid than he did from them. So really, it works all the way around. Here's the definition of parent. According to the law, it's a natural or adoptive parent, a foster parent, a guardian, but not the state, an individual acting in place of the parent, and on the bottom here, an appointed surrogate parent or educational representative. So there's a difference. All right? An educational representative is a person who takes on or holds ed rights that's been appointed by the court. All right? So you, as an advocate, if you take on ed rights for a kid, you're an educational representative. A surrogate is somebody that the district recruits and we hope trains to advocate for a kid who doesn't have a parent there. All right? So they can't get the parent to show up, or they, nobody holds ed rights, and the district has to get somebody to move the paperwork along or to move services along. That would be a surrogate. Yes, ma'am?
So if we don't hold ed rights, and just recently I went to a high school to gain information, they took my court document. I can get the information, I just can't make any decisions on their education.
Absolutely. You can get all the information, you just can't sign for services.
Okay, because she was picking classes, and so I just went in and just said I couldn't make any decisions. I said, that's fine.
You can provide your input.
Okay.
You cannot sign for services. All right, that said, it's only the ed rights holder who can sign for services unless an educational representative has been appointed or a surrogate has been ordered by the court.
So when they turn 18 and they're an adult?
They hold their own ed rights at 18. They're an adult. So there's a couple of things here, though, that are kind of interesting, which you might want to do, and I would strongly suggest that you try it. For minors, if you have parents that are working towards reunification but are struggling with advocating for their child, one of the things you might consider asking your judge to do is to assign ed rights, for the sake of argument, to you and the parent, so that you can show the parent how to advocate for their child, and that if their parent is struggling with whatever and can't show up at a meeting, the buck just doesn't stop, you can sign as a parent or as an ed rep and move things forward. We were one of the first jurisdictions in California to do that. And I've held education rights with biological parents to show them how to advocate for their children and to get them to bring them in to be an active part. You can also, the way it is, most people are conceived between two human beings. I'm fairly certain there are a few that aren't, but most are. And so therefore, most children have two people that hold their education rights, their parents. So it is not unusual for two people to share ed rights. It's a little different in terms of dependency court. Yes, ma'am?
Do the foster parents ever have ed rights?
Foster parents can hold ed rights if the court has appointed them as the ed rights holder. There can be a problem with that, usually because our kids on average change placement a number of times. Foster parent 1 holds ed rights for a kid and now they're in foster home 6. How likely is it that foster parent 1 is going to show up for the meeting? Not likely. So our judge, I've worked extensively with her for a long time. Usually what will happen is that unless a kid has been in a home for at least 6 months to a year, she really doesn't assign ed rights to foster parents. That said, legislation just recently passed the first of the year, and I'm going to forget the assembly bill. I think it's 223 or 232. Anyway, it grants foster parents access to the same information that you would be getting as a court-appointed advocate, which personally I think is really a mistake. Not to bang on foster parents, but there are some foster parents who I don't think it's healthy for them to know all of the particulars about the kids in their home because it biases them or prejudices them, and I think potentially is going to result in some lost placements for kids, not because of what they're doing, but because of what their history says. But that's a whole other issue. So, appointment of a surrogate or an ed rep. First preference is given to a relative caretaker, CASA, foster parent. You represent the student in all matters related to the provision of special ed and the services. Education representatives, if you're appointed, you have to resign through the court. Surrogates can resign, and schools can also terminate surrogates. And I can't stress enough that I'm sure there are plenty of nice surrogates out there. However, the next time a surrogate meets with one of the kids that they're making decisions about for any amount of time, it might be the first time. Surrogates walk into the meeting, They listen to the information. Usually they know people at the district, maybe they're a former district employee, and they just sign along the dotted line. They often don't know anything about the kid and have never met the kid. And it's a problem because theoretically you're supposed to know what the kid's needs are to advocate for them. Prior written notice, it's provided to parents anytime the school wants to change anything. And there has to be all these explanations, et cetera, and a copy of the parents' rights to challenge it. So the IEP team, this is the common IEP team that you would have, the parents, unless their rights have been terminated. If their rights have been terminated, they're usually not actively involved in reunification and getting their kids back. So they really shouldn't be there because drama ensues. A regular education teacher, special ed teacher, a representative who's qualified to supervise the design instruction for that kid, the individual who can interpret all of the instructional implications. That's the district psychologist usually, not the vice principal reading their report to you. You can bring anybody into an IEP meeting, or a parent can bring anybody into an IEP meeting. I would say a social worker should be there. You should be there. Whoever holds ed rights obviously should be there. And then on the bottom it says, if appropriate, the child. Yes, ma'am?
What about the foster home? If they're in a group home, should their representative be at this?
Yes. Well, the kids living in the group home personnel should have a clue as to what they're doing in school. Yeah, so group home personnel, somebody should be there, definitely. It says down here, if appropriate, the child, and my personal feeling is it's never appropriate. Ever. And the reason is that what do kids hear? Negative. They hear everything that's wrong with them, half of which they don't understand, right? And they have a tendency to, and plus it's, as kids have often said, it's boring. And God knows we would not want to bore children, right? So it's never appropriate to bring in the child for the meeting. Now, that said, it is appropriate to bring them in at the end. And it's especially appropriate if they've been struggling in the school. And the reason why is you can use this as an opportunity to maybe kind of flip the child's view of the adults in the room. All right? So, Angela, I'll pick on you. I'm just going to pretend you're the kid. So I'll bring, Angela 1 and Angela 2 for a few. All right, so Angela 1 is the child, and I bring her in at the end of the meeting. Here, just turn, can you turn around? Would you mind moving?
Yeah.
Just as I want you to face everybody, okay, because this is what it's like for a kid, right? It's just torture looking at all these faces. So, meanwhile, we have here, this is Angela 1's teacher. This is Angela 1's principal. Angela 1's counselor. This is the school psychologist. This is the discipline vice principal, the one that she's been in trouble with a few times. All right. This is another teacher. And this is a teacher's aide, because he's too young to be a teacher. All right, so Angela has struggled in school. She's on her 4th placement, and she doesn't trust anybody. And as her advocate and ed rights holder, I bring her in at the end, and she's probably not too happy to be here, just like she's not too happy right now. And so, I'll just show you something that I would do, and I would say, Angela, all these people here are here because they care about you. And I know you probably don't really believe that, but it's true to varying degrees. And so we've come to some decisions. So yeah, I know that you've been in her class, but we've decided that we're going to move you into her class because she has this hot-looking aide that I know that I know will draw you into class. No, seriously, she has an aide, and so she has some additional supports, and we know you struggle in math. And And frankly, this teacher here feels horrible that you've been struggling so much, but she, because she has an 8, has a little bit more time. She can give you some one-on-one help. What do you think about that?
I don't want to.
You don't want to? Okay, can I ask why?
Because I don't want to leave my friends in that class.
You don't want to leave? Okay, well that is a very common thing. Well, can I ask you, would you be willing to just try it for a couple of weeks and we'll come back and we'll revisit it and just see if you're getting the help?
Sure.
Okay, so your principal here, who I know you've seen because the discipline vice principal here has brought you in, the two of them really care about you. And so on Mondays, they would like to have lunch with you and just kind of check in with you. And so they'll buy you lunch and they will sit down with you away from your friends so your friends won't know, but you should see them when something is going on that's good. So what do you think about that?
I like that.
You like that? Okay. So give them a chance.
Okay.
They're going to, and usually, and by the way, I've usually talked to the adults about this. This is what I want to do. This is why. Most of the time they're like on board saying, if that you think that'll work, sure. You know, and then they'll chime in and say, you know, Angela, you're a great kid. We just got off on the wrong foot, so let's start all over and blah, blah, blah. And Angela's feeling like, oh, okay, you know. And so when you come to school tomorrow, you're not going to her class, but you're going to her class, right?
Right.
You got that? On Monday, they're buying you lunch.
The vice principal.
You good with that? Okay, so by previewing for her any changes, right? The worst thing you can do to a kid is have them walk in and have this teacher go, oh, Angela, you're not in my class anymore, right?
Yeah.
Innocently just saying, hey, no, go over here. She's like, what? You need to let kids know what's going to happen because they have to prepare for it, right? Even a good thing like Monday. Here we are on Wednesday, it's Tuesday, and Monday's going to come around, and Angela's already, I guarantee, over the weekend going to be thinking like, holy crap, I'm going to go to the principal's office for lunch. God, this is weird. I don't know if I want to do this, right? So on Friday, it's important maybe for the principal to see Angela and say, hey, Angela, what do you want for lunch on Monday? And try to be welcoming and facilitate that so it's a good experience for her. Does that make sense? Okay, so if you preview changes for kids, you bring them in at the end, you point out that everybody is there because they care about her. You know, because that's the other thing. Kids don't like it when people talk about them. But when you tell them that, you know, these people care about you and you frame it in a positive way, kids, they may not believe you, but they walk out and they're kind of going, right?
They want to believe it.
They do. Every kid wants to be liked, right? The trick is getting the adults to actually follow through with what they say they're going to do in a positive way, right? Yes, ma'am.
For the child, some kids may like 7 years ago, I think it was. I don't know, somewhere around the time. One of my CASA kids, he had an IEP, we had TT, we had all this stuff, and she was determined to be at every last one because she wanted to know what was going on. She didn't want nobody talking behind her back, and she was more involved in that meeting than I was, and she basically put control. And she sat there and listened to, you know, some of the negative things, and she was a good one. And she owns up to, you know, some of the things. But there's other kids that I had over the years that like don't even want to come close to it.
Right.
The anxiety of the day of. They like don't even want to bother to go to school.
How old was the kid that did a good job at her own IEP?
She was a freshman.
Right. All right. You know, age dependent is big. The younger the kid, the less likely you want them there because most of the stuff goes right past them. When you get to that age, for a kid who is hyper vigilant, which a lot of our kids are, bring them to the meeting if that's what they want to do. Yeah.
A lot of teenagers, but that was,
yeah.
They didn't want to be bothered with me.
Well, most kids don't. Most kids don't. And really, you want to check in with them ahead of time and say, look, I want to bring you in at the end of the meeting just so you know what happened. Some kids will say, I don't want to be there. talk to me at another point in time. I don't want to be there. That's fine. Don't bring them in. All right? But it's literally and figuratively a case-by-case basis, right? So, general ed present levels must state how the child's disability affects their involvement and progress. There are annual goals, including benchmarks and objectives, and I believe we need to take a short break because the battery is running down. Oh no, you're good. Oh, never mind. You were just like, okay. All right. Well, thankfully you weren't giving me any signs that could be misconstrued. All right. So, annual goals, including benchmarks and objectives, are related to helping the child be involved and progress. So, let's see. I picked on you last time, Heather. So, I'm not going to pick on you again. All right. Angela, too. All right. I need you to write this down, okay? All right. So, goals, benchmarks, and objectives. It used to be that all of these goals were tied to the high school exit exam, which doesn't exist anymore. For good reason, mainly because it didn't have really anything to do with high school. It really measured your progress up to like 8th or 9th grade, right? In any case, the annual goals and stuff should be written in a way that is not only sane, but makes sense. And I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to give you a common goal, and we'll just pick a mythical subject, all right? So Angela will be able to read the following passage and here you don't need to write all that down. Okay. At 70% accuracy, so write down 70%, in 3 out of 5 trials. All right? Now write 3/5. Okay. 70% in 3 out of 5 trials. You with me? Mm-hmm. All right. What's that mean? Yes?
They will read, and could you say that again at the beginning?
All right. Angela will read the following passage with 70% accuracy in 3 out of 5 trials.
It's hard to find percent accuracy with reading.
Okay. Well, besides that, let's talk about the numbers.
They have to read it 5 times.
Right.
And at 3 out of those 5 times, they have to get 70% of it correct.
Very good. However, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Angela reads the passage 5 times, and 3 times she gets to 70%, and the other 2 times she gets to 0%. What is that? Tell me the percentage. Pardon?
You got it. 70% 3 times.
What's the percentage? What's the overall percentage?
3 out of 5. This is a math problem.
Yeah, we're also determining which one of you may or may not need to be assessed for mathematics. All right, so let me help you out. 70% in 3 out of 5 trials. What's 70 times 60? What's the percentage? How much? Exactly. Thank you. 42%. Our teacher's aide was the first one with it. All right, 42%. That's great. What is 40%, 2% in terms of a grade? A miserable failure, right? Now, if you think about it, and you're going to progress Angela, she's currently reading at 50% accuracy, right? So 70% in 3 out of 5 trials sounds pretty good until you do the math, right? So let's say it's 70, 80, 90. We can extrapolate it out, right, in 3 out of 5 trials, right? It's 42%, 48%, 54%. We've taken her from an F to an F. To simplify things, really to oversimplify things. Now, that 70% makes more sense if it's 70% in 5 out of 5 trials, right? Because if we really want her at 70%, it has to be across the board. That's where she has to be. I always tell when I get this pushback from schools about wanting to make things 4 out of 4, 5 out of 5, 3 out of 3, I tell them, I said, look, when this kid grows up, they can't show up to work 3 out of 5 days and keep their job. Right? You show up every day. So maybe in Angela's case, if she's reading at 50%, we drop the first benchmark is 60%, and then 65, and then 70. Reasonable. Something that's reasonable but also pushes her. Does that make sense? Okay, so you need to look very carefully at goals and benchmarks and work backwards. Where do you want her to ultimately end up reasonably, and how are you going to get the student there? Oh, my battery died. Okay. Okay. Well, maybe now we need to take a break because we have some technological issues. So we're going to pause for this